This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We want to know more, do you? Informed Sources brings our region's top print and broadcast journalists together
to examine the stories behind the headlines.
And we can all learn more.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a breakout from the Orleans Parish Jail by 11 inmates deemed armed and dangerous has dominated the news today. Elsewhere, a proposal to divert some of the sediment to nearby Baratraia Bay has become muddied in public debate. We'll look at what the fuss is all about there. There's also been environmental debate over the proposed Denka chemical plant in St. John the Baptist Parish. This week, that issue took a sudden turn, and the election of a new pope has surprisingly brought attention to his Creole ancestries and reopened discussion about what that term means. We'll also look at Bayou St John, where a Boogaloo is making waves. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mike Smith, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Robert Collins, columnist for Verité News and political analyst for WVUE Fox 8. And Errol, let's go on over to you because the big news of the day, a big breakout from the Orleans Parish Jail, the Criminal Justice Center, 11 inmates.
Yeah. There was a time before the present jail was built that with the old prison that breakouts were like weekly news, you know. If we'd have been doing this show back then, probably we'd have a segment, you know, this week's breakouts. But since the new jail has been built, I think most of it was under Sheriff Fody, most of the impetus. You don't hear about breakouts very much. And to break out, you have to really be skilled because, I mean, there's a lot of technology that goes in. Later today, the Sheriff's Office did send some photos of, and it looked like they were saying there was a cell that they all went through, like a jail cell. And it looked like in the back of it, there was like this wash basin apparatus where they removed that and they were able to kind of crawl through some bars. These guys must have been very, very flexible, all right? And they weren't fat either, okay, because, I mean, to get through. But so it looks like it was through that. So after all these years, you'd think, anyway, it's 11. Later in the morning, 2 of them were caught. We know that one of them was caught in the Montleon garage, and he was hiding behind a car. Or beneath the car, and some deputies from the sheriff's office caught them, and then the state police brought him back to jail. The other one, as of today, we don't know the details. We know somebody else was caught. We don't know by whom. Or
these are the names of the individuals who escaped.
Okay. These are the 11 who were caught, and you can see the age range. I guess pretty much the age range that you would expect. The one that was caught today was Kidnell Miles. And it was ultimately Troop Nolan that I think brought him back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's, as far as we know, there's still the other ones. Well, there's 9 out there. We know there's another one, and they're described as being armed and dangerous. So, you know, that's all we know.
And they were incarcerated pending criminal charges of violent criminal charges. Some of them, not all of them necessarily, but
and politically comes at a sensitive time because where you have a sheriff's race and where the sheriff who's running for a first time for re-election has opposition, Michelle Woodfork. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, and I think it might be, but it happened today that Jason Williams, the district attorney, came out with an announcement announcing his support for Woodfork and announcing a fundraiser. So this is going to all be caught up in that. Not that I think the break has anything to do with it. An interesting comment, though, was Helena Moreno was asked by some of the media to comment on this, and she was critical that it took so long for other agencies to find out. If the breakout was discovered at 8:30, supposedly the police have said they didn't hear about it until 10:30, and it seems like it wasn't later in the morning until the word got out. So that's going to be a question that's going to be asked.
One of the many questions. I mean, certainly a big question is how could 11 people escape the prison? They escaped the jail, which according to what I'm hearing, is that they think the escape happened around midnight. As you noted, it was not discovered until 8:30. It's 11 individuals who were unaccounted for all that time. Why? Why?
Yeah. And if it was through that one cell, how is it that 11 people can, throughout the evening, go into one? You'd think it's kind of, you'd be kind of suspicious. And so this is going to cause a re-examination of all the criticisms of the sheriff's office over the past few years. It has not been too many breakouts because it's been a fairly secure jail, but this certainly changes all of that.
The escapees left a little message on the wall. They escaped, through a hole in the wall from what I read, and there was a little message written next to it. Too easy, but too misspelled. It was just T0 there,
Yeah.
T-O instead of T-O-O. But it was easy for them to do it, apparently, not that complicated. So I guess we'll be finding out a lot more, as we said, a lot more questions about that. But that certainly has everybody scratching their heads saying, how could this happen? How, with 11 people escaping the jail? All righty, thanks a lot. Let's go on over to you, Mike, because some real big news has been sort of rolling out over the past months, actually, about the mid-Baratraia sediment diversion, which is sort of the cog in the wheel of the master plan. It is the big project. It's a real expensive project, and it's now suspended.
Yeah, this has been building for a while. Governor Landry has been signaling that he doesn't want to do this project, and now they're taking actual steps to try to back out of it. So they suspended construction for 90 days, and then the Corps later followed up with a suspension of the permit, allowing it to go forward. So that's where it stands, and the state is saying it's now pursuing a different sort of project with a smaller diversion accompanied with some other land building type techniques. So that's kind of where it is now. It disappoints a lot of coastal advocates because who saw this as sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, given we had BP funds paying for probably most, if not all of it. So we'll have to see, whatever replaces it will likely have to go through a whole series of studies and evaluations, which could take more years. And if, it's going to be.
And the question, would the funds, the BP funds, which were allocated for the project as it initially has been designed, would they be available? We can't count on those funds being available, can we, if the project changes?
That's right. You'd have to go through a process. I think experts do feel like we can get at least a lot of it funded with BP funds. You just have to go through all the steps. Again, this was a years-long process. Just to remind people, this actually broke ground in 2023, and now we're pulling out of it. So yeah, it's possible. It's just a lot more steps are going to be required.
The state has already put a lot of money into this, into the site preparation, which was then halted, some months back. And then also, I guess they've entered into business deals with different contractors. Are we going to be on the hook for a lot of money for a project that just is not going to exist?
A lot of people are asking that. So it's about, I think the estimate is we've spent about $500 million so far. It's up in the air as to whether we're going to have to pay that back. I think there's some line of thought that we can, if they're going to do a smaller diversion in the same location, not all of that money will be wasted. It can go towards whatever project they're going to replace it with. But it's an open question. A lot of people are asking that. So, yeah.
How certain are the smart people in all this about how well the whole concept of sediment diversion works? Will it come to a point that it's all done and they say, well, it's really not working that well?
Yeah, smaller scale diversions have built land and are continuing to build land. One at this scale, it has never been done before, and there were some open questions about how well it would work. A lot of modeling has shown that what kind of land it would build, and just, the idea behind it is we're mimicking how the state was built through the Mississippi River, which is kind of the logic of it. So I think a lot of people felt like this, considering the scale of our land loss problem, we had to attempt something on this level. Yeah.
And also, I mean, the opponents will point out all the time there are some negative impacts here as well. So that has been a big concern. And then something that the Landry administration brought up too is that they're saying that some important information was not submitted in a report that the Edwards administration had submitted to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they say that important information was withheld, which Edwards said absolutely not the truth.
Yes.
So what happened there?
Yes. So there was a different set of modeling that showed less land building, although the Edwards administration officials say it wasn't. This was a different sort of modeling. It looked at some worst case scenarios, didn't incorporate all the variables that it should have. It was for another purpose. Edwards administration said we did communicate this to the Corps. The Corps indicated to us that it would not affect the permit. But Landry's administration said this should have been given to them. The Corps now says, yes, that should have been given to us. It says it was intentionally withheld, although it also said in a separate letter that it would not have affected the permit. So there's a bit of a muddled message there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Let me just qualify that. At this time, whenever we talk about the Edwards administration, we're talking about John Bell.
John Bell, yeah, we should say, yes.
Everybody was saying, oh, no, Edwards was
That's
involved.
right, yeah, no, not
All right,
Edwards.
so if anybody wants any more information about what's going on with the coast, including this controversy over the mid-Baratraia sediment diversion, next week is a big conference called State of the Coast. It's produced by the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. 3 days worth of important information about coastal issues. You're going to be moderating a panel?
Yeah, I'll moderate a panel on Tuesday about the river and sort of writing about the river. We've also got a big series coming out on the river. But yeah, this is a huge conference that gathers all the coastal experts. It's such a huge issue for Louisiana. It really gets to the heart of who we are. So yeah, it'll be...
Yeah, 3 days in New Orleans over at the Convention Center. You're going to be participating too.
Quick plug, I will also be speaking at State of the Coast. I'll be on Thursday. I'll be talking about the socioeconomic effects of land loss.
Okay, 3 full days of good discussion. A lot of science, cultural, and social issues as well over at the Convention Center. All right, guys, thanks a lot. All right, Robert, over to you, because we got that wonderful news last week about the linkage of our new Pope to New Orleans and, you know, the Creole culture here. And so that's what you wanted to talk about.
Sure. So we got a couple of major shocks last week. First of all, we have an American Pope. I mean, whoever thought we'd have an American Pope? The whole theory behind the College of Cardinals would never elect an American as Pope is because America already has most of the political and financial and military power in the world, that they would never, you know, give the papacy to an American, because then America would basically just control everything. So that was the theory. But, you know, that theory is, as we see so often in modern history, that theory is gone. And we got that shock. And then right after that shock, we got a second shock that it turns out that this Pope, the former Robert Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo the 14th, actually has a maternal grandmother from the city of New Orleans. His maternal grandmother, Louise Bacquier, was born in New Orleans in 1868. And she went on to marry a gentleman named Joseph Martinez, who we know from records was a cigar maker. On their wedding certificate, he puts his birthplace down as Haiti, but we haven't been able to find his birth certificate yet, so we're not exactly sure where he was born. But we have tons of records on her. We know she was born in New Orleans, and she comes from a long generation of Creoles from New Orleans. They got married. They moved to Chicago in 1910, and then Mildred Martinez, the Pope's mother, was born in Chicago in 1911. The Pope, and then she married Louis Prevost, Louis Prevost, and then the Pope was born in 1955 in the city of Chicago. So what's interesting about this is that in census records from that time, the both Joe Martinez and Louise Bacquier are listed as either black or mulatto, mixed race, on the census records. And so it's very interesting. Now, we noticed that once they moved to Chicago, we looked at the Pope's mother's birth certificate, and it's listed as white on there. And so what we can extrapolate is that if you look at this period of time, this was Jim Crow laws were started to be enforced in Louisiana and in other southern states at this time. There was the famous, one drop rule, which says that, if you were 1/8 black, even though you might look white, you might be very light skinned. Legally, you were black, and so you could be discriminated against in housing. You could lose rights, all sorts of bad things to happen to you. So this was part of the so-called Great Migration that we saw of not just Creoles, but just black people in general that moved to cities like Chicago that were more tolerant on race, that didn't have the one drop rule. Of course, there were economic reasons. There was jobs and opportunity in the city of Chicago. So basically, we can we can see the Pope's grandparents sort of taking that Great Migration, moving from Louisiana to Chicago for more tolerance, more opportunity, and then basically they just sort of blended in. When they got there. So, so I guess you could argue they probably lost their black Creole identity once they got there. But it's just still fascinating that we have a Pope that has this clearly identifiable, and we have a lot of evidence that he has black Creole roots.
And the Creole roots are just so strong here and so have historically been so important to our community too.
Sure. So, if you look at the history of black Creoles in New Orleans, it's not just enslaved people. Pre-Civil War, we had a very large community of free people in color who were merchants, who were blacksmiths, who were morticians, all sorts of professions in the city. And as we look at the Pope's genealogy, the family that he comes from descends from those free people of color that basically lived in the 7th Ward of New Orleans. And as I've been telling people, if you look at the Pope and his three brothers, these are, I went to Brother Martin High School. These are guys that look like Creole guys that I went to school with at Brother Martin.
We recognize them,
exactly.
We definitely do. Well, it's really exciting. Do we know if the family ever came back to visit relatives or anything?
I have scoured the interviews of his brothers that were in the New York Times and other national publications. As far as we can tell, we don't have any evidence that anyone in his family ever came back. Now, his brothers do acknowledge the New Orleans connection. Connection. They do know about the New Orleans background. But growing up, they said they assumed their mother was of Spanish descent because she kind of had the olive skin complexion that we saw. So as far as we know, they have not been back yet. However, we know that the Pope, who's a highly educated man, canon lawyer, we know he follows current affairs. I'm sure by now he's seen the national coverage of the New Orleans connection. So I'm sure he's going to be interested in what's going on in the city of New Orleans, and I just want to point out that we're about to have an archbishop vacancy in the city of New Orleans, and so it'd be interesting. I believe the Pope's going to take a very an interest in who becomes the next Archbishop of New Orleans, because before the Cardinal Prevost became Pope, his job was he oversaw the office that appoints bishops. That reviews the qualifications and appoints bishops. So it's going to be very interesting if he takes a personal hand in who our next Archbishop is.
Well, I think the new Pope has already given us one miracle, and that is to liberate this discussion that people can be comfortable talking about Creoles and black Creoles and talk about it, because it's such a rich history.
Sure.
You can look at the history of jazz, going up the river from New Orleans to Chicago. It's the same people doing that. So it's an important discussion that people haven't been willing to talk about. But man, this is something we all know about it.
Well, we know he's kind of busy now. He's got a world to look after, but he can come visit anytime. Right? All right. Thanks a lot, Robert.
New Orleans first.
So we would want. Okay, let's talk about the Boogaloo that's going on this weekend.
Yeah. Well, first of all, speaking of the Haitians, the dances, the voodoo dances that were once done along Bayou St John, that was a big thing that was done for us. So that was part of that of that culture too. Bayou St John is just so historic. It was this waterway from the lake that would connect through roads and canals at different times to the old town, which is the French Quarter. So it's really important with developing as far as trade in that part of town. Gradually over time, it kind of got truncated a little bit. There's no really open way to get there from the lake end. They have kind of like this dam sort of structure. And then at the Lafitte Street end, it's truncated, and they don't have the bridges that go over it aren't high bridges, and so you can't have any big boats or anything. And so it's really been developed to be a passive, a very passive place. I remember a long time ago going to a meeting, I kind of live in the neighborhood, and kind of interested in if it could be developed more, have more benches and trees and recreation. And somebody told me people don't want that, okay? That they want to keep it a passive spot. And that's pretty much what it's been. I mean, it's a nice spot. But anyway, so the issue is this one end of Bayou St John along Moss Street, close to Lafitte Street, where the Boogaloo has been held. And neighbors have been complaining, as neighbors do, about parking issues and about garbage and about music. And apparently it's been going on for several years. This year, Councilman Girusso got involved in it. And it is the council that issues the permit, but usually the protocol among council members is that they defer to the district councilman, whoever's district it is. And so Girusso is really in the power position on this. And so this year he says, well, no, we're going to defer the permit because every year we talk about these problems and nothing happens. Well, I think that drove people to the table and made an issue. So it's going to happen this year, but there was a big meeting and there was a promise, let's work out some things next year in terms of trying to avoid the problem. And I don't know if it can be done, but at least I think it scared people, and they're going to have the discussion. I mean, it's a good event, and anything that salutes, gives recognition to Bayou St John. One thing that's been talked about, and not in any official capacity, it's just out there, an idea that's been floating, is why not incorporate it with Deutsche's house, which is a little bit up the bayou a little bit, where you have the facilities already. You have a lot of parking. You have like a theater space, and you have the kitchen space. And so you can have the event there, but still spill over into the bayou. And then you can eliminate some of the problems, have the best of both worlds. And it kind of reminds me of what we're going to see next week with the Greek Fest. The Greek Fest, you have facilities on one side right there that people can go into the parking and all that, then you can still have access to the bayou. So maybe that kind of an arrangement.
Of course, the Greek Fest closer to the lake.
Yeah.
Not the bayou.
It's better. So it goes on tomorrow, and with hopes of trying to.
It's gotten very popular now. I mean, the bayou is just filled with all kinds of different watercrafts.
And they have these little kayaks that go up and down, and these various kind of boats. It's really fun. And let me tell you, on a normal day, on a normal Sunday, it's really fun to walk by and just see the people just in canoes back there. It's really a lost resource.
It is. It really is. Well, hope everybody has a good, fun, safe time this weekend. All right, Eve, thanks a lot. So let's wrap up with you, Mike, because we got word that Denka plant, which is in St. John the Baptist Parish, has just suspended its operations. Why?
Yeah. So this was a little bit of a shock. The company that owns this plant, it produces Neoprine. It's the only plant in the country that produces Neoprine. But one of the chemicals used in that process poses a cancer risk, it's a likely cancer risk is the way it's defined. So this has been it's taken on wider importance in the environmental justice debate. There's a school just next to it, although that school is now closing. And under the Biden administration had taken a very adversarial approach to this plant and put some very harsh restrictions on it, saying this had to be done. It was overdue. The company says that is costing it a lot of money. It's also looking at saying the demand for Neoprine is going down. It says it's got inflationary concerns, a lot of uncertainty going on right now, and it registered a loss of about 109 million last fiscal year. So it suspended production and said they might try to sell it. They're not sure of the future of this place.
So these tightened regulations were to reduce pollutants, to reduce emissions, which of course the community around it is very happy to see that it's not going to be releasing emissions in the air by suspending production.
That's right, yeah. They're happy to see it. They were sort of there was a little bit of a mixed message. They were sort of dismayed that the company was saying the cost of complying with this was one of the big reasons, because they say, well, now under our new governor and under the Trump administration, those rules are going away anyway. So they said we're not really left with many protections anymore, although the company says there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of regulations.
Now, the operations of this plant, it contributed money to the state, right, from tax dollars. So we're not going to be getting that. The state won't. But also, it employed people. What's going to happen to the people who work there?
Yeah, that's two big things. The parish, there was a lot of sales tax money that was generated through this plant. It employed 250 people. So that's a big question for them. That's going to be, it's a lot of jobs for a parish that size. So, yeah, if they can sell it, maybe it'll be restarted. They haven't ruled out restarting production there, but it sounds like they really are trying to offload this plant.
And offload it to whom? Who would be potential buyers for something like this?
That would be a tough, it would be one of the chemical manufacturers. Right now with all the uncertainty, it seems like it'd be a tough sell. I'm not an economist, but considering all of those factors, it may be some time before we figure out what's going to happen with that plant.
This can't be something that the Landry administration is very pleased about.
It was telling, I think, that they did not comment on this. We asked them for comment, both Governor Landry and Attorney General Merle, who has also stepped in on their behalf. Neither one wanted to comment, so it was, yeah. All
right, we'll see where that goes. Thanks a lot, Mike. All right, guys, other stories? Let's go over to you, E.
Yeah, there's a group calling itself the Crew of Kings that's been running announcements about this great parade it's going to have on January 5th of every year, and people can join for only $2,000, right? Well, anyway, Councilman J.P. Morrell did a Facebook last night. It is really something you should see, because he uses the word fraudulent fairly often, but he points out that the thing they talk about just can't happen. But it's worth seeing. One, I've never seen a councilman do this kind of thing. It's very educational. You learn a lot about Mardi Gras, but it's also very entertaining. So go to Facebook, key in J.P. Morrell on Facebook, scroll down like to the second item and see it, and you can learn a lot and you'll get a few laughs too at the same time.
No writing. Over to you, Mike.
So next week, NOAA, the federal agency, is announcing their highly anticipated hurricane season outlook. But the difference is they're doing it here for a change in Jefferson Parish. So, but this is coming at a very strange time. A lot of big cuts being proposed for NOAA, a lot of uncertainty surrounding FEMA. And obviously, we're very concerned with all that. So that'll be something to keep an eye on.
And the National Weather Service, too.
And
concerns about that.
Yeah.
Robert?
Quick shout out to the person who started the firestorm about the Pope's Black Creole heritage. It was genealogist and historian Jari Honora at the Historic New Orleans Collection Museum. They do great work over there.
Well, his story just took off like wildfire around the world. You know, we knew about it in no time. So congrats to Jari. Exactly. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us, too, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
From Masterpiece to Nova, Antiques Roadshow to Agatha Christie.
And of course, stepping out and Informed Sources.
We are pleased to support public television.
It's been our passion.
For a lifetime.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.